The headlines, the issues impacting you, all on This Week in Cincinnati on 9 on your side.
Good morning and welcome to This Week in Cincinnati. I'm Craig McKee. First today, what's next in the Kentucky race for governor? As you know, Attorney General Andy Beshear defeated incumbent Republican Matt Bevin this week, and Bevin is challenging that result. The vote was very close. Beshear's margin of victory was about 5,100 votes. That works out to be about 1.4 votes per precinct. This all happening, of course, in an election where turnout was larger than expected, especially in northern Kentucky. 2 counties in northern Kentucky went for Beshear, Kenton and Campbell. Compare that to 2016 when northern Kentucky was strongly in support of President Trump. Now, Governor Bevin wants every vote across the state double-checked for accuracy.
But I just want you to know that the reason we're doing this, we want the people of Kentucky to have absolute confidence that their votes were counted as they should have been counted, that the law was followed.
Now, Bevin says his campaign is gathering information about election irregularities, but hasn't provided any more information or evidence. And for his part here, Governor-elect Andy Beshear says he is busy putting together, of course, his transition team now with plans to go ahead and take that oath of office next month. Joining us now to talk about the election results, what it really means, and where we go from here is NKU Associate Professor of Political Science, Bryan Salzman. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So the big question here, I think, ties to the recanvass. 5,100 votes, give or take. Can a recanvass, you think, really make that big of a difference with that vote number?
That would be a big change. I mean, you know, if we figure they go back to each machine, they look at each machine, make sure that all the votes are tallied correctly. So if a machine were to be off by 1 vote or 2 votes, that's going to take 2,500 machines being off in order to get to that 5,000 number. So 1.4 million votes cast, 5,000 doesn't sound like much. But when we start to think about it in terms of each machine having to be off, you would basically have to have entire machines or entire precincts that had failed in some way with all of those votes going to Andy Beshear. So probably not very likely.
This campaign, obviously, from the Bevin side of the campaign, didn't end with the result that they were looking for. Their campaign really stuck to a traditional format up until the last couple weeks. And then we saw Governor Bevin switch to this, you know, being very public about tolls and the need for taxes and all these other things. And it was kind of like, well, wait a second. It seemed like a strategy shift. Can the last 2 weeks of an election really make that big of a difference? I mean, it's difficult maybe to pinpoint how Beshear won the 2 northern counties here in northern Kentucky. But can that last 2 weeks really make a difference when it comes to a campaign like this?
Yeah, I think it absolutely can. In fact, we have something we like to call the October surprise, which is, you know, something coming out. If we were to think of the 2016 presidential election, the Comey letter that came in, you know, a lot of times we look at that as really kind of moving the needle in the last couple weeks. In fact, I think I would say that something small happening in the last 2 weeks is probably much more important than something more significant happening 2, 3, 4 months out, where there's an ability to then, you know, have it pulled back or have something else change. So that window really does matter. Now, Governor Bevin, it really did seem like it was kind of all over the place. There was a lot of movement in the last 2 weeks. And honestly, some of that had to do with the fact that Matt Bevin is Matt Bevin, and Matt Bevin is going to tell you what he thinks. So, for instance, the issue of the tolls. That took everybody by surprise that he would even bring that up. At some point, he clearly decided that tolls was going to be the only way to get that bridge built, and he wasn't going to hold back and wait for the election in order to let people know that. He probably would say, well, I thought the people deserved to know that. His campaign manager may disagree at this point, but that was very Matt Bevin. But a lot of the other stuff was clearly being driven by the campaign, tying the election to impeachment, really pulling it towards national issues. That's something that's going to be, you know, really, again, led by a campaign manager.
So in looking in that, and it's difficult to go out and ask every single voter, hey, did you change your vote because he mentioned tolls, you know, to pay for the Brent Spence Bridge and things like that nature. It's a hyper-local topic. Can local, very local, centralized topics really impact an overall state election that much, though?
Well, when the difference is 5,100 votes, it will definitely matter. Then there's the larger question of, would people decide to change their vote? And there's 2 ways, I think, to look at that. One is that some people may have been not interested in coming to vote, and it was enough to bring them out to vote. So that's one, you know, it's a non-vote versus a vote. But the other is that there may have been a group of people who said, I really am not a big fan of Matt Bevin, but on all of these policy issues, I support him, so I'm going to vote for him. And then that toll issue was just enough to say, you know what, I'm going to go with my gut on this. I'm going to vote against him. But if we look at all the other races, clearly Northern Kentucky supported every other Republican, very much so. Those individuals, when they show up, say, well, I'm going to support Attorney General Cameron and all the rest.
And let's talk about that because, Bevin had called out and said, we're going to have a clean sweep. That's what I want. Republicans across the board. Now you end up with, once this is certified, obviously, and complete, Andy Beshear as governor, Democrat, with a Republican administration, and how can anything get done moving forward? Probably
very little will get done, but there are a number of powers that the governor will have. If we think about things like, expanding Medicaid and reinstating that program that we had in Kentucky for that expanded Medicaid, that's something. There were a number of things related to public school funding that the governor is going to be able to weigh in on. Appointments to boards, these things matter a lot. The administration of the government is going to matter a great deal, having who the governor is. In terms of creating new policy, we should expect, really, if anything, more Republican-led policies to be passed, because not only do we have these down ballot, these other constitutional positions filled with Republicans, but the legislature essentially has a supermajority. So they'll be able to override. They could pass a law, he could veto it, and then they could just override it and move forward. So really one of the big takeaways for this election is that Kentucky is a very, very Republican state, and I think that we saw that in the down ballot races, and we're going to see it moving forward in terms of policy.
We have just about 40 seconds left here. The national media, 24-hour news cycle, CNN, NBC, those folks, once they called the race, they immediately started the conversation about what does this mean for the President Trump campaign come 2020. Is this a sign? Is this, any indication? What do you say to that?
Well, generally, I think that this was a very unique race, but to be clear, Matt Bevin was just about a carbon copy of Donald Trump, although maybe we should flip that because Bevin was elected first, and that maybe what this does indicate is that there is a breaking point for people where they just can't handle the comments, and maybe that's what we're starting to see is there's some serious fatigue that should worry the Trump camp at this point.
All right. Bryan Salzman, Northern Kentucky University Associate Professor of Political Science, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.